the passion that keeps me going is I feel that we're literally on the cusp of what could truly be a seismic revolution in health. And this seismic revolution is never going to come about from the invention of another pill or a drug or a procedure or an operation. This seismic revolution will come about when we have the will and the grit and the determination to share with the public what is the lifestyle, and most specifically, what is the nutritional literacy that will empower them as the locus of control to vanquish chronic illness.
Hi everyone, I'm here to share with you the power of a whole foods plant-based diet and how by eliminating animal flesh, meat, milk, eggs, fish is going to help you stop feeding cancer and help you eat the way that humans are designed to eat.
Throughout most of human history, whole plant foods were, on average, 95% of the human diet worldwide. Today, whole plant foods are just 7% of our diet. In other words, industrialized countries have turned the human diet upside down. It should be obvious that cancer would follow this radical change in diet. Here is a brief summary of the differences between plant foods, animal foods, and refined foods. When you look at the plant food column, every item fights cancer. Animal and refined foods, on the other hand, promote cancers.
Unfortunately, the treatments we're doing today are not working.
Over the last several decades, medicine has waged a major war against cancer, concentrating on earlier diagnosis and improved therapy. The war is not being won. Nevertheless, medicine shows few signs of admitting that its strategy may be flawed. In this, it resembles a World War general who stated, "Casualties? Huge. Ground gained? Negligible. Conclusion? Press on."
Dr. Michael Greger literally wrote the book on how not to die from cancer.
After Dr. Dean Ornish conquered our #1 killer, he moved on to killer #2. What happens if you put cancer on a plant-based diet? Ornish and colleagues found that the progression of prostate cancer could be reversed with a plant-based diet and other healthy lifestyle behaviors, and no wonder. If you dip the blood of those eating the standard American diet onto cancer cells growing in a petri dish, cancer growth is cut down about 9%. Put people on a plant-based diet for a year, though, and their blood can do this. The blood circulating within the bodies of those eating plant-based had nearly 8 times the stopping power when it came to cancer cell growth. Now, this was for prostate cancer, leading cancer killer specific to men. In women, it's breast cancer, #1 cancer killer of young women. So researchers wanted to repeat the study with women using breast cancer cells instead, but they didn't want to wait a whole year to get the results. Women are dying now, so they figured, well, let's see what a plant-based diet can do after just 2 weeks against 3 different types of human breast cancer. Cancer growth started out powering away at 100% and then dropped after eating a plant-based diet for 14 days. Here's the before picture. A layer of breast cancer cells is laid down in a petri dish, and then blood from women eating the standard American diet is dripped on them. And as you can see, even the blood of women eating pretty poor diets has some ability to break down cancer. But after just 2 weeks eating healthy, blood was drawn from those same women, so they acted as their own control. Same women, 2 weeks later, their blood dripped on a new carpet of breast cancer cells, and this is all that's left. Just a few individual cancer cells remain, their bodies cleaned up. Before and after, just 2 weeks eating healthy, their bloodstream became that much more hostile to cancer.
I want all of you to have cancer-fighting blood, and that blood only comes from eating plants. Future generations are going to look back and see how barbaric we were in our treatment of cancer.
We don't have to look at studies to see how powerful diet can be in protecting us from cancer. We can look at people who have battled and then reversed cancer with a change in diet. Take the story of Meg Wolf. As documented in her book, it was discovered she had a malignant tumor in her leg. The treatment? they amputated her leg and put her on a regimen of drugs. A few years later, the cancer showed up in her thyroid. The treatment? They removed half her thyroid and put her on a regimen of new drugs. A few years later, the cancer spread to her breast and lymph nodes. The treatment? They amputated her breasts, put her on a regimen of new drugs, chemotherapy, and radiation. None of these treatments worked. They caused horrific side effects, and she was told to prepare for death. As her doctors were pronouncing her terminal, she discovered macrobiotics, a plant-based diet composed largely of brown rice and vegetables. After stopping the toxic treatments and switching to macrobiotics, her body started to recover until she was completely healed of cancer. Conventional medicine had missed the point. While they were amputating body parts and treating the symptoms of cancer, they completely ignored what was causing the cancer in the first place and left a ticking time bomb inside her body.
Dr. T. Colin Campbell wrote the book The China Study, and it is the most comprehensive study ever done on human nutrition. And he found in his studies that he could literally turn on and turn off cancer by adding animal protein or taking away animal protein.
Cancer is divided into stages. First, there's what we call an initiation event, starting with genes. Cancer starts with genes. It might be genes we're born with, it might be genes that are actually changed by a chemical. So those genes become capable of producing cancer cells as they divide into the future. I call that like a seed, that we're planting seeds. That's the first stage of cancer. It can happen very quickly upon consumption of some chemicals or whatever. Then the long stage goes from that point to the point where we actually see we have cancer. That may take years. And that's growing these seeds. It's promoting their growth. In fact, that stage is called promotion. And so the question of whether we do or don't get cancer, it turns out, is primarily related to not the amount of seeds we may plant or the amount of genes we may have that can give rise to cancer. It more relates to how we fertilize that, how we promote those cancer cells to grow over time. That's where nutrition comes into play. Nutrition comes into play back here too, but it's particularly prominent during this phase. And animal protein, as we started doing the research, we could, experimentally, we could turn on the growth of these cells. They go much more rapidly when they were fed animal protein.
Here's Dr. Christy Funk. She's one of the top oncologists out there, and she actually worked with Angelina Jolie when she had her mastectomy. But she has changed her whole way of thinking since working with Angelina Jolie, and she's discovered, what she didn't discover in medical school, that it's animal flesh that's making cancer grow. And one of the biggest components in growing cancer is called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, and it's found in cow's milk, in cow's flesh, and every other animal's flesh.
When you're a kid, extra growth is good, but when you're an adult, extra growth can mean a tumor. How do our cells know when to tip the balance in favor of more dividing and less dying, and when to come back into balance? Well, a key signal is IGF-1, a growth hormone called insulin-like growth factor number 1. Levels go up when you're a kid, so you grow, and then come back down. Should your levels stay a bit too high as an adult, though, there's this constant message to our cells, grow, 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 divide, don't die, keep going, keep growing. And so, not surprisingly, the more IGF-1 we have in our bloodstream, the higher our risk for cancer. More IGF-1, more prostate cancer. More IGF-1, more breast cancer. Of course, it's not the original tumor that tends to kill you, it's the metastases. IGF-1 is a growth factor. It helps things grow, so it helps cancer cells break off from the main tumor, migrate into surrounding tissues, and invade the bloodstream. What do you think helps breast cancer get into the bone? IGF-1. And the liver, IGF-1. Lung, brain, lymph nodes, IGF-1. Helps transform normal cells into cancer cells in the first place, then helps them survive, proliferate, self-renew, grow, migrate, invade, stabilize into new tumors, and even helps hook the blood supply up to the new tumor.
So now that you know what IGF-1 is, how do you get rid of it? How do you lower it? How do you prevent cancer?
Just a few days of walking and eating whole healthy plant foods, and our IGF-1 levels drop below enough to reverse cancer cell growth. What if we stick with it? Going to some predicant spa and getting healthy for 2 weeks is one thing, but what about long term? Does your IGF-1 start to creep back up to standard American diet levels again? No. Here's after 11 days, and it just gets better. People eating plant-based diets for 14 years have half the IGF-1 in their bodies, and more than twice the amount of IGF-1 binding protein than those on the standard American diet. We know decreasing animal product consumption decreases our IGF-1 levels, but how low do you gotta go? How plant-based does our diet need to get? Well, let's look at IGF-1 levels in meat eaters versus vegetarians versus vegans. The aim of this study was to determine whether a plant-based diet is associated with a lower circulating level of IGF-1 compared with a meat-eating or lacto-ovo vegetarian diet, and this is what they found. Only the vegans had significantly lower levels, and the same relationship found with IGF-1 binding capacity. Only the vegans were significantly more able to bind up excess IGF-1 in their bloodstreams. This was a study on women. What about vegan men? They found the same thing. So, even though vegan men tend to have significantly higher testosterone levels than both vegetarians and meat eaters, which can be a risk factor for prostate cancer, the reason plant-based diets appear to reverse the progression of prostate cancer may be due to how low their IGF-1 levels drop. So more testosterone, but less cancer. The bottom line is that male or female, just eating vegetarian did not seem to cut it. It looks like to get a significant drop in cancer-promoting growth hormone levels, one apparently has to eliminate animal products altogether. The good news is that given what we know about IGF-1s, we could predict that a low-fat vegan diet may be profoundly protective with respect to, for example, risk for postmenopausal breast cancer.
It's not just IGF-1 that feeds cancer, it's also the protein and fat in the animal's flesh.
Study after study comes out that if you are eating large amounts of fats in your diet, you are significantly raising your risk for cancer. If you are a woman eating a lot of fat in your diet, and that's talking about the hidden fat in cheeses and meats, etc., you increase your risk of cancer of the breast. Here are some countries that are compared by how much fat is eaten versus how many women die of breast cancer. And you can see that the Americans and the Dutch, with their big dairy industries, lead the way in not only fat consumption, they lead the way in breast cancer deaths. Thailand is a Buddhist country. They eat very little meat and dairy products, and breast cancers are so rare there, if you find a case of it, you report it at grand rounds. This seems to be a disease of diet, of a high-fat diet. If I were a woman with breast and I wanted to decrease my chances of getting breast cancer, I would get the fat out of my diet. And that includes excessive amounts of vegetable oil. You need a little bit of vegetable oil, but you don't want to slather 2 cups of corn oil over your spaghetti for any reason. Men are not spared the ravages of a high-fat diet either, because when a man eats lots of animal fats, those fats are turned into male hormones called androgens. And androgens stimulate the prostate gland to get big. In our society, when a man reaches 60 or 70 and his prostate gland gets big, his doctor puts his arm around the patient and says, "Well, George, that's just part of getting old, your prostate gland's getting big." No, it's not. That's 70 years of running androgen through that prostate gland. No wonder that gland gets big, and prostate cancer is the #1 killer of men. And if you compare countries of the world versus how much fat is eaten and how much men die of prostate cancer, sorts out just the same way. The more fat that is eaten in a country, the more the men die of prostate cancer. And again, it's a very rare disease in Thailand, where people eat rice and vegetables and traditional foods. So, animal fats. They clog you up, they make you fat, and they increase your risk for a number of types of cancers. There's 3 good reasons not to eat animal fats, and as I said, there's absolutely no reason to eat them ever. Now, I'm describing problems with eating animal flesh. They have too much fat, and that includes chicken and fish. Fish has a tremendous amount of fat and cholesterol in it, And chicken flesh is very fatty food. If you ever watch your mother make chicken soup, you ever see all that fat that rises up to the top there? Well, don't kid yourself that chicken is lean meat. It is not. There's just as much fat and cholesterol in chicken as there is in beef. Animal muscle is animal muscle. And when you eat it, it raises the level of fat in your blood, and you do not need it. There's another problem with eating animal flesh. It has too much protein. Now, when I was in medical school, I never heard the words too much protein. I thought the more protein, the better. Put them on a high-protein diet, make them strong. Tain't so. You better believe there's such a thing called too much protein, and most North Americans suffer from it. First of all, what is protein? Protein is the building block material that you use to make the hard structures of your body. Your fingernails are made of protein, your hair is made of protein, your bones are made of protein. It's the brick of our bodies, a solid substance. Now, you don't need very much protein during the day. You only need about 30 grams of protein a day. That's the weight of 10 pennies, okay? Imagine 10 pennies in your hand, that's how much protein you need. But look how much protein the typical North American consumes. On a typical North American eating day, a typical American who has bacon and eggs for breakfast and a glass of milk, who has a cheeseburger and milkshake lunch, and has a beefsteak dinner with a glass of milk and some ice cream for dessert, is clipping along at 150 grams of protein. That is a 5-day supply of protein. That is too much protein. Why? Because your body can't store protein. You can store fat, you can store carbohydrates, you can't store protein. So what happens? Well, your liver starts breaking down that protein, and as it metabolizes it, it releases all sorts of toxic nitrogen-containing waste like urea and ammonia and amino acid fragments. And these have a detrimental effect on the body, because as all these amino acid waste go through your kidneys, it makes you lose calcium out of your urine. Why does that happen? Because there's fundamental differences between animal protein and plant protein. And I'm talking about the protein in meats and dairy products. Animal proteins contains amino acids that have sulfur, and sulfur makes extra acid in the body. And as acids wash through the bone, they dissolve calcium out of the bones. Plants have much less acid. Animal protein is very concentrated. The muscle of an animal is the most concentrated protein on the planet. And so there's a big bolt of protein that goes into your bloodstream as soon as you eat it. Plant protein is mixed up with fiber. When you eat whole grain rice or whole grain barley, it takes hours for that to be absorbed into your bloodstream. The absorption time is much, much slower. So the less acid nature of plant protein and its slower absorption rate means it's much gentler in the body, and it doesn't pull calcium out of your body.
Take charge of your own health, like this young lady did.
The road that I was on, nobody told me about nutrition. Nobody told me about that there was an alternative. Nobody told me that there was any other route than chemo, radiation, and surgery. I point blank asked my doctor about that. I asked her in the beginning, you know, do I need to change the way I eat? Do I need to eat more organic? Do I need to do any things like that? And she told me, she said no. She said nutrition, she said there's no clinical data that proves it actually makes a difference. And she said it's more of just a psychological thing, that people feel like they're more in control when they watch what they eat, but it makes no difference as far as affecting the cancer. And she told me literally, she said, if you want to eat a donut, eat a damn donut. And so I did that, you know, and I saw the results from it. I mean, I ate whatever I wanted. I ate whatever I could get down. I ate comfort food. I didn't change anything health-wise. And I saw other cancer patients, you know, they would be in there getting chemo and they'd be drinking Cokes and, you know, eating burgers and stuff just because the doctor said, basically, you know, whatever you can get down, that's what you need to eat. Don't worry about, you know, food. And if I would have done that, I don't think I'd be here. Because what their prescription was after 4 months of the strongest, because I had dense dose treatments, so it was stronger doses in shorter amount of time. After all of that, the strongest chemo they had to offer, it didn't kill any cancer, it just shrunk it. And then their prescription, when it didn't work and the cancer was still there, is they wanted to give me more chemo. And so if I would have stuck with their treatments, I honestly don't know if I'd be here, because it would have just been chemo after chemo after chemo, and then radiation on top of that. And I met with the radiologist because I wanted to be informed. I wanted to make good decisions. I met with him for over an hour asking questions, pointed questions, and it doesn't increase your overall mortality. All it does is if there's recurrence in the exact spot where it first occurred, it'll prevent that from happening. But it doesn't make your lifespan any longer. And all those drugs just weaken your body. It weakens your immune system. I saw that from, having to wear a face mask out in public and to go to work. All it does is tear your body down. It doesn't do anything to build it up. And it also increases your chances of leukemia, of other cancers. Weighing the options, just logically speaking, looking back from, you're wanting me to tear my body down and possibly give me more cancer to potentially stop any recurrence. It makes no sense at all. And so I thank God that I found Dr. McDougall, because nobody had told me that was a legitimate option. And I didn't want to go see, there's so many alternative therapies out there. And what I respected about Dr. McDougall is that he's been doing this for over 3 decades, that he has scientific evidence. He doesn't just tell you, well, I feel this is a good option. He shows you, here's the case studies, here's the scientific evidence. And that gave me comfort, that it wasn't just his opinion, but he's got scientific evidence that backs it up. And now I'm living a healthy, medicine-free life. I'm on no medicines at all. I'm healthier than I've ever been. And I'm completely cancer-free, and I'm going to stay that way, because it only makes sense. Why would you tear your body down to prevent something from possibly happening when you could just build your body up, build your immune system up, and make it as strong as it possibly can be, so if anything tries to come back, your body at least has a fighting chance to beat it.
A great way to learn what works is to observe the longest living people on the planet. And the longest living people now are called the blue zones. And those are pockets around the earth where people live to 100 years and beyond with little or no cancer.
And if you look at the traditional diets of more than 2,000 Okinawans, this is how it breaks down. Only 1% of their diet was fish. Less than 1% of their diet was meat, and same with eggs and dairy. So it was more than 96% plant-based, and more than 90% whole food plant-based, very few processed foods either. And not just whole food plant-based, but most of their diet was vegetables, and one vegetable in particular, sweet potatoes. The Okinawan diet was centered around purple and orange sweet potatoes. How delicious is that? Could have been bitter gourd or soursop, but no, sweet potatoes. So 90+% whole food plant-based makes it a highly anti-inflammatory diet, makes it a highly antioxidant diet. If you measure the level of oxidized fat within their system, there's compelling evidence of less free radical damage. Maybe they're just genetically have better antioxidant enzymes or something? No. Their antioxidant enzyme activity is the same. It's all the extra antioxidants they're getting from their diet that may be making the difference. Most of their diet is vegetables. So 8 to 12 times fewer heart disease deaths than the U.S. You can see they ran out of room for the graph for our death rate. 2 to 3 times fewer colon cancer deaths, 7 times fewer prostate cancer deaths, and 5.5 times lower risk of dying from breast cancer. Some of this protection may be because they're only eating about 1,800 calories a day, but they were actually eating a greater mass of food, but the whole plant foods are just calorically dilute. There's also a cultural norm not to stuff oneself. The plant-based nature of the diet may trump the caloric restriction, though, since the one population that lives even longer than the Okinawa Japanese don't just eat a 98% meat-free diet, they eat 100% meat-free. The Adventist vegetarians in California, with perhaps the highest life expectancy of any formally described population. Adventist vegetarian men and women live to be about 83 and 86, comparable to Okinawan women, but better than Okinawan men. The best of the best were Adventist vegetarians who had healthy lifestyles too, like exercising non-smokers, 87 and nearly 90 on average. That's like 10 to 14 years longer than the general population. 10 to 14 extra years on this earth from simple lifestyle choices. And this is happening now, in modern times, whereas Okinawan longevity is now a thing of the past. Okinawa now hosts more than a dozen KFCs.
Believe it or not, the longest living people on the planet right now are people who live in Loma Linda, California, and they follow their faith by what God told them to eat in Genesis 1:29, where God says, "Behold, I have given you every plant-yielding seed on this face of this whole earth, and every tree with fruit in it, and that shall be yours for food."
And she At age 100, Benita Williber still has a healthy mind, body, and spirit.
I've given myself to the Lord, and I've left myself in His hands, and I have trust, and I have been very, very well taken care of.
She's not alone. There's an unusually high concentration of centenarians in her hometown of Loma Linda, California. It's one of only 5 so-called blue zones worldwide, areas where people live the longest. The others are Okinawa, Japan, Korea, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, and Nicoya, Costa Rica. Loma Linda is an hour east of Los Angeles. About 250,000 people live here. The reason they're so healthy is because most of them are Seventh-day Adventists. They strongly adhere to the belief of respecting the human body as a temple of the Holy Spirit. That means no alcohol, no tobacco, and following a plant-based diet.
In Christianity, we have the Holy Scriptures. What God said from the beginning, you should eat. He gave us the nuts and the grains and the herbs that He placed in the earth. And He said, you will do better if you subsist on that type of thing.
What has your diet been throughout your life?
Vegetables. My sister liked fruit. Well, I do too, but vegetables had priority, and I like them raw.
Everywhere you look, we're seeing another breast cancer awareness event. Whether it's a walk or a run or raise money for this, raise money for that, even KFC's in on it. I'm telling you to take charge of your health by stop feeding it and prevent breast cancer.
In the 1970s, my dad did research in the laboratory, and he found that the chemical that was most effective at turning on cancer cells is the protein in milk. It's called casein. He said in all his years of research, he never saw something more effective at turning on cancer than the protein in milk. So it's interesting that in this event here, this breast cancer awareness event, that they're actually promoting milk at the finish line of the race that they're going to run today.
Well, I'm sure a lot of you are sitting there right now thinking to yourself, well, what am I going to eat? Well, it's really simple. Instead of your usual bacon and eggs for breakfast that feeds cancer, take oatmeal and blueberries and almond milk that doesn't feed cancer. Or instead of that chicken salad that you think is so healthy, have a bean and rice burrito. No animal products in that. And a very common stay thin diet is that salad and piece of salmon. Well, salmon grows cancer just like any other animal products, but sweet potatoes don't, and they'll help you lose weight as well. So what about soy and the estrogen that's in soy? Well, there's quite a bit of difference between the estrogen that comes from an animal, from the flesh and the milk of an animal, and that of a plant. Soybeans have phytoestrogens, and these estrogens actually block the absorption of the bad estrogens that come from animals. But you want to eat a whole food plant-based diet, not a processed plant-based diet. So stay away from all the processed meats and cheeses that are out there these days. Dr. Greger explains how plant estrogens are actually beneficial to prevent cancer.
It's called a selective estrogen receptor modulator, something that has pro-estrogenic effects in some tissues, like bone, but anti-estrogenic effects in other tissues, like the breast. Drug companies are trying to make them, but phytoestrogens, natural compounds in plants like genistein and soybeans that are structurally similar to estrogen, appear to function as natural selective estrogen receptor modulators. How could something that looks like estrogen act as an anti-estrogen? The original theory for how soy phytoestrogens control breast cancer growth is that they compete with our own estrogens for binding to the estrogen receptor. As you drip more and more soy compounds on breast cancer cells in a petri dish, less and less actual estrogen is able to bind to them. So the estrogen-blocking ability of phytoestrogens can help explain their anti-estrogenic effects.
Some final words from Dr. John McDougall.
The major studies done on the dietary treatment of people with breast cancer or the prevention of breast cancer have been useless. They have basically taken and taught a diet, a reasonable, moderate, prudent diet that is still a very sickly version of the American diet, to one group and left the other group on the regular old sickly American diet, and they got minimal results. And so it's advertised the diet does nothing to prevent or to cure breast cancer. They've never tested it. They don't have the guts, so to speak, to test it. What you really need to do is you need to take a diet where breast cancer is unknown, like used to be in Asian countries. Virtually unknown. It's a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. You need to take that diet, the diet that I teach, and you need to take and put a group of women on that diet, and you need to take another group of women who either are intended to prevent breast cancer or already have breast cancer, leave them on the American diet, see what happens. To most doctors, that's unreasonable. That's too much to ask of a woman, to ask her to change to oatmeal and hash brown potatoes and bean burritos and minestrone soup. But what will women do to keep their breasts and to stay alive? Women will check their breasts every day and worry about the results. Women will go to a doctor at least once a year and have that male doctor check her breasts. Women will have their breasts squeezed between mammogram steel jaws to prevent breast cancer. That's what women will do. And women will go so far as to have cuts in their breasts made called biopsies. They'll have big chunks of their breasts taken out. They'll have the whole breast amputated. They'll have the nose taken out of the armpit on that side. They will have radiation to their skin and chest, which will increase the risk of dying of heart disease. They will take anti-estrogen drugs, and they will take chemotherapy that will make their hair fall out and make them throw up for a year. But they won't eat bean soup. That's too much to ask.
Thank you everyone for watching this video on the power of a whole food plant-only diet when it comes to fighting cancer. When it comes to fighting cancer, we need to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is not another surgery or another pill, it's what we're putting in our mouth. I hope this video empowers you to take charge of your own health, and you've learned that there are foods out there that you need to avoid, and they are specifically animal foods and man-made processed foods. Go to my website, onesingleact.org, and learn more.